Kia ora. I researched refugee settlement in New Zealand and Sweden, two contexts that had a lot of similarities, but also a lot of significant differences. I was particularly interested in language learning and use and how these intersected with more social and structural factors such as belonging, recognition, and social inclusion or exclusion. My study was qualitative and most of the data obtained from interviews. I adopted a dialogical approach, both in terms of methodology and in terms of theory. So, what did I find? Well, in short, former refugees were highly motivated to learn the language of their new countries in order to experience belonging, recognition, and social inclusion. They also had a strong desire to gain a voice and be seen as legitimate speakers of their new context. The struggle for inclusion and the desire to have a voice was often the main motivating factor for language learning, as in this quote from an Afghan woman. I have to speak from my own tongue. It's better, it's reliable, it's convenient. However, language learning took time, and in the meantime, individuals experienced exclusion when their needs for language support were not considered through policy and in interactions with agencies, institutions, and providers. They also felt delegitimized when they were not recognized as full social participants due to linguistic and cultural differences. In New Zealand and in Sweden, there seemed to be a common perception in policy and political and public discourse that language learning is an individual endeavour and that it's contingent on the person's own motivation and effort and nothing else. This has led policymakers to introduce incentives and penalties in an attempt to speed up the process of language learning and subsequently speed up the process of entry into employment. However, my study suggests that the issue was not at all a lack of motivation and effort. Instead, language learning was impacted by a range of factors that tended to be beyond the control of the individual. For some, earlier disadvantages and discrimination had impacted on the access to schooling and on the literacy development. This, of course, had impacts on language learning after settlement. Further, in the country of settlement, the reluctance of proficient speakers to engage with new speakers impacted on opportunities for informal language learning. And then incentives and penalties brought in order to speed up language learning and speed up entry into employment had the opposite effect, as they tended to limit the opportunities for formal language learning that were available. Lastly, family separation could very understandably impact significantly on an individual's ability to focus on language learning. So to finish off, for refugee settlement to be truly successful, there needs to be a more thorough understanding of the barriers to language learning and effective ways of addressing these. There also needs to be a greater appreciation of the time it takes to learn a language and consistent language supports put in place for those who are still working towards proficiency. Thank you.